Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This time on this episode, we will be taking the motor and transmission out of this 1998 4th gen Camaro. Again, this is a 1LE car, so it is the stripped down, all manual packaged car that supposedly you could, take drag racing or whatever. But it's a limited numbers car. They made less than 100 of these particular models this year with the 1LE package. So main reason I'm going to pull it apart is like the last Camaro, it's leaking oil everywhere, and we've got to seal this thing up. Plus, there's a few other things that I want to do with the Camaro, some upgrades, and it kind of had a little bit of a ticking sound. I want to pull at least part of the motor apart and make sure that it does not have any bearings in the bottom of the oil pan. These are kind of known for the rocker bearings coming apart, and that could be the source of my noise. So I'm going to look into that as well. So for starters, I was supposed to have a helper, but apparently my son is too busy playing Xbox to instead of helping me out. So thanks, Sean, for not helping. So anyway, maybe he shows up, maybe he doesn't, but in the meantime, I'm gonna roll this car forward, get it on the hoist and raise it up, start pulling the tires off of the front, and kind of do what I did before with the last one by lowering the engine on top of the cradle out from underneath the car. So I'm gonna start by getting this up in the air and then go from there.
Just wanted to point out for those of you guys who are lifting these up or jacking them up, where I like to put the front jack is actually on the subframe right inside here. The factory lift point is right here where the notch is, and that's fine as well. Just do not jack right here. On some of the newer ones, this is actually printed no jack. Don't jack here. This will actually break your fender. So this is not a jack point. Here or here, guys. And then on the back, there's also a notch here, but I actually like to lift right here, which is essentially kind of the shackle for the control arm. But this is the point I like to lift on the back. Just kind of have a way of doing things my own way, and those are my jack points.
Okay, so now I've got the car on the hoist and the tires are off. Got it raised up just a little bit, just so I don't have to bend over and lean over to get a lot of this stuff undone on top of the motor. And I'm gonna go kind of top bottom, back and forth. Probably gonna be a little bit different process than when I took the last one apart, just because I don't necessarily follow, a manual or all data or some of the other programs out there. If I really get stumped, I might look at something like that, but I just kind of do things how I feel like it. And so if this disassembly process is different than the last one, it's just because I chose a different way of doing it, but the steps add up to the same, and it will pretty much be the exact same process as the last one, minus the fact that this is a manual versus an automatic, so there'll be a slave cylinder in there to deal with where the automatic doesn't have that. So I know my rotors look disgusting. It's because this car was actually in a really bad rainstorm right before I pulled the car in the shop, so they got wet and they rusted like they always do if you don't drive them. And you can just see, just sitting in the shop for a night or two, you can see how much it leaked. So that's why it's here. Up top, I'm gonna start with undoing the battery cable. We're gonna take the airbox off, undo the harnesses here to the temp sensor, mass airflow sensor, take the intake off. And then I'm going to work my way over to the PCM, and I'm gonna start taking that apart and getting it out of the way because the harness has to come with the engine. If you guys remember the last video, or if you're new to this video, the whole wire harness for the engine, it gets laid on top of the motor and it gets dropped with the motor. So I'm gonna do that and pull the PCM out and flip it over. Plus, that PCM is going to get sent off and get reprogrammed for a couple of the upgrades that I'm going to do on this. And I better point out, if I forget, it's better to do it now than forget and not tell you guys later. On the last one, I did poly mounts, polyurethane, on the engine mounts and the transmission mount. And I've got to say, Huge upgrade as far as power to the ground. I didn't think it'd make that much difference, but between that and the tune, the motor put a lot more power to the ground. So this motor is definitely getting polyurethane mounts on the engine mounts and the transmission mount in the back, and also the torque arm mount as well. One thing you've got to be careful with these GM clips, especially on 20-plus-year-old cars, is they're plastic, they're brittle, so be very careful. My best friend with doing any electrical connectors is this 90-degree pick. Whether at work or here at home, these are awesome to have. I use this for everything. It's probably my third favorite tool. But a lot of these you can just grab and gently pry and pop off. When you pry this up, just do not pry very far, you'll break it off. You just need to pry high enough to release it from this little tab right here. So just a little bit of pressure as you pull it off, and you should be good, and you won't break those. One thing I'd like to point out to you guys is this service cart that I have. I use one of these at work and also here at home, and I love this thing, and I'd like to recommend it just because it makes things a lot easier. Your tools and all your stuff is right here. It's over your work area. It's not behind you. You don't have to turn around and grab tools every time you want to do something here and turn around here, back and forth. These work out really good. They are adjustable for height, and they will clear most average size pickups. Won't clear lifted vehicles, but for 75% of the vehicles, you can just slide it over and work on the vehicle. Obviously it's padded so it doesn't hit, and most of these areas are all padded too, so it kind of will help protect your vehicle. But I cannot recommend these enough. I used to have the standard service cart for years. I went to one of these about 5 years ago, and I will never go back. Yeah, you don't have drawers and stuff, but it's a trade-off that I'm willing to have ease of my tools here, my work here. And if I remember right, when I picked this up about a year ago, it was still under $100, so they're not that expensive. Stay away from the higher end ones because there's really no difference between this and those. I've tried both, and the $100 Amazon one works just as good. Look who finally showed up to help. Well, Sean here is going to help undo the computer for us, so we're going to again go ahead and undo the two connectors on the computer. And then I did forget about these three right here. That's kind of under Sean's arm. There's three connectors on the fender, inner fender there, that we have to unhook those three as well to fold this harness over. Correction, 4 connectors. Forgot about this small one right here. So there's actually 4 connectors in line right here with the PCM that get folded over on top of the engine. Also undo this one vacuum line that goes to your vacuum junction right here. This vacuum line comes from the inner fender. You want to undo that so you can fold your harness over and get around the hood strut here. And now pulling this out, pull this out, and undo these 2 bolts right here to get this out of the way, because this has to come out because there's some more wires that are inside next to the inner A-pillar that you have to unplug and push through the firewall. Okay, ECM is out, and now you can see this wire harness right here. We have to feed this to the firewall right here, and this S-shaped is actually part of the main harness for the engine. So to get that out, we come around to the inside of the vehicle. So for this cover along the A-pillar has to come off, and this actually runs along the rocker right here, the rocker jamb, and there are some screws, Phillips head, that you have to take out to remove that. But before you can take this trim piece off, you have to take this underdash trim off. And with this, it's got some push clips up in here, and also it has a metal clip right back there that you have to pop off. Take this off first, and then you can pull this piece off. Cover's removed, and I moved these wires out a little bit. You have 3 connectors here. There is kind of a cream color, a white, and a blue. And you just need to unplug those and then fish that wire through the firewall right up
there. If you can see it, that's the grommet that's got to go through. My next step is going to be undo the two heater hoses from the water pump, the lower radiator hose, the upper radiator hose, and the steam vent right here. And I will say that I already have drained the coolant from this vehicle, so that was done previously. So I can go ahead and do the hoses. And also a step that I also did earlier was I also evacuated the Freon, which I did not show that. But I'm gonna go ahead and undo these hoses and then gonna raise it up and start undoing some of the stuff on the bottom. From the previous video, I also would like to mention that I like to do a list like this, just a temporary list that I can write down all the stuff that I have done as a reminder and then go back through and just kind of cross it off as I put it back together, just so I personally don't forget anything. Coming back to these radiator hoses, I like to use a pick like this with a blunted tip, and what I do is just kind of roll it around the radiator hose like that. That makes it really easy to get hoses that have been stuck on for years off. So don't need to use this, but I do really like to use this for taking all the hoses off. And I am gonna replace the radiator in this car too, because the plastic tank on the side has a split that's starting to form, and I do not want that to actually rupture. So I'm gonna be putting a radiator in this car as well while I've got it apart. So if you guys see the radiator out at a later step, just know that you do not have to take the radiator out. I am just doing that because I'm replacing the radiator for my own purposes. So the radiator and the condenser does not have to come out of the vehicle. And since I'm doing a cradle drop, the suspension components that have to be undone, which I've already started here, but I did want to show you, is upper ball joints, knock those loose. The strut from the lower control arm, you want to undo that. And then I undo the sway bar here on both sides. Again, this is both sides. I'm only going to show one side, but just so you know, this is both sides. And then also the ABS connector, it runs inside here on the inner rail, and you kind of see the plug right there. That will be undone as well. So upper ball joints, sway bar, lower control arm where it mounts to the strut, and the ABS sensor. And then the brake lines, I'll get to that later, but the brake line stays attached here. You actually undo the brake line up above underneath the hood. Now, one thing you don't have to do, but I do, is I undo the tie rod ends. You don't have to, because the rack is going to stay attached to the cradle. The only reason I like to do it is to allow the spindle to swing backwards, and that way you don't have pressure on your brake line or your ABS line. You can zip tie this out of the way and attach it to like this point right here. There's different ways of doing that. It's not a big deal to undo these, so I just pop those off so this can swing out and just kind of stay relaxed without putting pressure on different components. The next step for me is going to be undo the retaining strap bolts on the drive shaft and pull the drive shaft out, and then we're going to undo the exhaust. For the exhaust, I'm going to undo the mid pipe here and going to leave the head pipes and the converters attached to the engine. This whole front assembly will all drop with the cradle, but actually the exhaust doesn't matter front to back, because hopefully it's all getting thrown in the garbage anyway, and I'm planning on doing a complete new system, headers all the way back. So, but either way, regardless, I'm gonna try and just undo it here and see if I can slip this off for now, and just so I can drop the exhaust with the motor. Drive shaft is out, exhaust is undone. Just let the pipe hang there for now. And also going to undo these 4 bolts and remove this brace plate right here. Okay, now this next step you may or may not have to. It depends on how your vehicle was wired, but there is a wire harness. My light's putting a lot of light on it right now, that runs down the frame right here, and it goes to the starter, goes to the oil sensor here, goes to the crank sensor, a few other things. On my car, I'm going to have to undo all these connectors and run this harness up top to get it out of the way. And the reason is because it's wrapped on the wrong side of the air conditioning lines, hoses, and also the heater hose. And I don't want to have to undo all that stuff, and it's just going to get in my way. So I'm going to undo these wiring harnesses and then pull that harness and move it up to the top and put it on top with the rest of the harness that's just kind of sitting there. Again, this will depend on how yours is, the wiring is ran. And I'm also going to take the starter off too. I'm gonna have to take the starter off anyway, just because I'm gonna end up taking the transmission off the motor when it's out. So I'm just gonna take the starter off now. As good a time as any. Also, while I'm here and before I forget, there also is the positive battery cable that goes to the starter. You're gonna wanna do that. That stays with the vehicle, and there is also a ground strap that's kind of up above the starter here that's bolted to the block. You're gonna wanna undo that as well. That's gonna stay with the vehicle and get that out of your way to drop the motor. Now I've snaked that lower harness up through here and just set it on top with the other harness. Next step is gonna undo the throttle cable here, undo the fuel line and the evap line right here. And for that fuel line, there is a special tool usually to disconnect these GM 3/8 fuel lines. And while you're over in this general area, now is a good time to undo your vacuum line from your brake booster, undo your secondary air injection hose right here, and also undo your steering shaft right here. Next step is to undo the AC lines for the compressor. You can do the bottom one here at the condenser, and then low side line where it goes to the accumulator up on top. So undo those two lines. And then now is the time to decide if you want to undo your clutch line that goes to your master cylinder. I'm gonna actually leave that, and I'm going to leave it, and I'm gonna do my master cylinder from the pedal and the reservoir up top, and I'm gonna leave that attached to the motor. And one of the final steps is going to be to undo your two brake lines that follow down with the K-member. I've just highlighted these, and it is actually stamped where all these brake lines go, so you don't need to really worry about marking it. I just highlighted it for the video to show you guys. We're going to do this one right here and this lateral one right here for your left front and right front brake lines. And you just want to snake these down. They kind of mix and match with some other brake lines that go down there. You just kind of have to snake those down as you're lifting the chassis off the motor. So don't forget about those when you start doing your lift. And here you can see I've actually laid the harness on top of the motor, getting ready to drop it out from underneath the body. One other thing that I would like to mention is your steering shaft here. It's not focusing very well, but it is really hard to slide it apart, and it's kind of easier as you lower the K-member from underneath the body to kind of watch that and slowly help it along as you slowly lower the K-member till that breaks loose. Okay, it's time to lift the body off the engine, and what I like to do is I like about 5 jack stands at least for this. I like to support the K-member with 4 jack stands, just because depending on how good your motor mounts are, your K-member may flop around a lot. So I like to support it in the front with a jack stand each side at the front of the A-arm. And it doesn't really matter exactly where these go, just as long as you have good support here. And in the back, I like to put it back towards the back of the A-arm. And then the rear one, I use to support the back of the transmission. Now, to lower this, there is 6 bolts on the K-member and 4 on the transmission. There is one here in the front. There is one here in the middle. And don't forget about this one right here in the back. This is mirrored on both sides, so they'll be in the same position, just reverse of each other. And then on the transmission, it's pretty self-explanatory, but the cross member, there are 2 here. And then there are 2 right here next to the catalytic converter. So if you're well supported, then go ahead and start loosening those up and let it rest on your jack stands. Two final things that I have to do before I drop this, and one is pretty simple because somebody already butchered my car and it wasn't me. So I'm missing the boot and the plastic trim piece that covers this. For mine, all I gotta do is take my shift knob off and this lever should slide down through the boots to the bottom. The other thing that I have to do, and I always forget the fastest way to do this till after I've done it, but I'm gonna tell you guys so you know how. You have to undo this torque arm. And to undo the torque arm, there is just one little bolt that holds the strap in place. You undo that bolt, slide the strap out of the way, and then just let the torque arm rotate up and it's unhooked. Okay, so I lied about that being the last step. There is one little ground strap right here that goes to the motor. Unhook that, and also the power that goes to the alternator, that large wire right there. You're gonna wanna unhook that as well. And I do ask you to be really careful and do watch everything to make sure everything's unhooked. I think I got everything in here, but just in case, double check and be very careful and go slow as you're raising the body off the motor. Again, always watch everything. Word of warning though for you guys, if you do something like this, this is where the snowball effect comes into play. And what I mean by that is you pull this out with a certain plan, and I know that when I do this, this is always gonna happen, but a lot of people might not. When you do this, you think, okay, I'm just gonna pull this out and reseal it up. Well, there's always a lot more. For example, you notice stuff like this. Crankcase ventilation's broken there, it's broken there, it's broken over there somewhere that I saw. That part, I think the last time I bought one was like close to 200 bucks from GM. There's probably others available that are cheaper, but that's just an example. You find out more oil leaks that are leaking everywhere. Like this one's leaking a lot from the camshaft position sensor. When I pulled this out, the clutch master started leaking out of the rod right there where the rod seal is. So I'm gonna probably have to do that, which means most likely I'm gonna get this separated to do the rear main, and I'm probably gonna have to do a slave. And while I'm there, you know, clutch. So there's the clutch to do, which it's like, no, I'm not just gonna do a factory clutch. You know, I'm doing performance upgrades, so I'm probably gonna wanna upgrade the clutch to like an LS1 clutch or equivalent, just so it'll hold. And then there's, of course, the mounts, torque arm mount, trans mount, motor mounts, and this one is getting long tube headers and a full exhaust. That was already planned, but that's just something that, you know, you might want to decide to do while you're out of there. This is going to have a lot of other stuff going on as well. I am going to take some of the valve train apart just because it's got a little bit of a ticking noise. I want to see what's causing it. Got a few ideas what that's going to be. So, you know, that's probably going to be some more money. So just so you guys are aware, you know, this thing snowballs fast when you start getting in this deep. And whatever my budget is, you know, I always think, okay, this is my budget, but unfortunately, it ends up being like 3 times, 4 times what I initially planned, because of everything that I see that needs to be addressed. And a lot of stuff you can get away with not doing, but if you're in here, obviously you have it this far apart, you might as well just take the time and do it. And in my case, you know, this thing might sit here for a month or two while I gather up the funds to get everything back together and stuff it back in the vehicle. So this will probably be sitting here a while I go through everything and try and figure out what it needs. There is some stuff, you know, that might get overlooked, like the tie rod ends are still tight, but you know, obviously we have boot issues here. So there's a few things that I might overlook, I might not. In the end, it depends on how many damn zeros this piece of shit ends up raking out of my bank account, which I really don't have the money to do, but you know, it's something that had to be done. Well, so there you have it. There's another engine on the floor and some more work for me to do. Would like to say, you know, this is just, again, a how-to video on the disassembly process of taking one of these motors out of a 4th gen Camaro, well, I should say an LS1 out of a 4th gen Camaro. And I realize, you know, most of you don't have a hoist, but you know, if you do have the ability to use a hoist or you have a hoist, this is by far the fastest and easiest way to do this. And if you get creative, you know, there's always other ways as well. But, you know, I pulled this out just working on it an hour or two a night for a couple of nights, and it really is a fairly simple process, even though it looks major. I would like to say, though, it is getting expensive to buy any type of tool equipment, and I was actually looking at the price for a hoist. I really wasn't looking for another one. It was just more curious maybe type thing. And the price of hoists have gone up so much that, I mean, they're almost getting out of the range of price for the average, you know, do-it-yourself person. I paid, I think, $3,200 for my hoist 2 years ago, and they've almost doubled in price now since then. So unfortunately, that is getting out of the reach of a lot of people. But again, just kind of a how-to video, and I definitely will be doing a more video on, or more videos I should say, on the disassembly process of the motor, just because I like to video document, you know, everything that I do in the shop that I think might be worth putting on video. So more videos to come with this motor and the Camaro, and I've also got some more videos to come that are kind of similar. I did acquire this motor recently. This is a 5.3 out of a 2012 Avalanche, and I was going to try and do like a 500 horsepower build out of this. This has got some really good components on it. It does have the 243 heads, which are kind of desirable, especially if you port them out. They can flow just about as good as an aftermarket head, although I might end up putting those heads on this motor. I haven't decided yet. Really depends on my budget in the end, what I can and can't do. But just to give a breakdown of this before I close this video out, I'm gonna do long tube headers, full exhaust. I'm gonna do a true dual exhaust on it. And it may or may not get a cam. It depends on what I find in the valve train, how much that's gonna cost to do, whether I do a cam or not. Definitely gonna set the computer off and get tuned. Gonna do an EGR and secondary air injection delete because the headers do not support that. Also going to just do an overall tune for the motor to try and get as much out of it as possible, if I do a cam or not. Regardless, it's gonna get a tune. And then obviously gonna go through the whole motor, reseal everything. Anywhere oil can leak, it's gonna get sealed no matter what. And then fix the other stuff, you know, that I showed you guys, like the crossover tube here for the crankcase ventilation, and just all kinds of other stuff. Most likely gonna get a clutch upgrade. Definitely doing motor mounts. Gonna go with the poly mounts on this as well, everywhere, just because I really loved them in the other car. It really helped put power to the ground. So it's gonna get those as well.
So I will end up documenting that whole process for your viewership pleasure if you care to partake. As always, thanks again for watching, everyone. And if you like the video or learned something, please subscribe and hit that like button. But more to come. Till next time. See you later.